Hi, you're watching It's About Youth, and I'm Soraya Mia. Now, Malaysian families face a huge economic burden in raising children in today's economy, with the rising costs of childcare and education making it one of the factors many young couples choose to delay or forgo having children. Now, according to the Credit Counseling and Debt Management Agency, the cost of raising a child today could go as high as 1.37 million ringgit once the child completes university. Now, how can the government further support young parents to ease their burdens? Now, let's speak with our guest for today, Lee Min Hui, gender consultant from United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, as well as Nur Hafizah Noslan, PJ Lestari advocate and special officer to Petaling Jaya MP. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's begin with Hafizah. What do you think are the main challenges for families and parents today compared to those, say, about 5 decades ago, especially when it comes to raising children?
Okay. First, again, thank you for having me, Ms. Sarah and Team AWANI. All right, so let's start with the concept of sandwich generation. So basically, sandwich generation is a middle-aged group ranging between 30 to 50 years, having to take care of their elderly and also children simultaneously. So in essence, this group are sandwiched between the younger and also older generation. So as we go through globalization, so there is also a major shift of demographic transformation that involve and influence the change of society and also socio-cultural norms. And with that, it resulted to the issues of aging population and fertility rate increase, and thus affect the sandwich generation. Okay, back to the question. Is there any difference between 5 decades ago and today? Of course, there is difference, because if you were to compare, for example, like our M1000 previous 5 decades ago, the value is not the same as today. Okay, let's take it simple scenario, like for RM50 ringgit. So previously with RM50 ringgit, you can fill up the trolley full of groceries. But today's with RM50 ringgit, what can you get? It's just several items. So this also goes to other things such as cost of rental, cost of education, cost for health. So it's increased. So with the rising cost of living, and also it's not comparable to the rising of salary, it does impact the ability of sandwich generation to spend and cater for both the elderly and also children. Okay, let's see from the minimum wage. Like recent budget 2035 announcement is stated that the minimum wage will increase to 1.7,000 in the early 2025. But also, several economists said that 1,700 is not enough and it's not suffice to cater for the rising standard cost of living. So, where is the balance on this? All right. Besides, if we were to look also data released by DOSEM in 2022, it says that 6 out of 100 household couldn't afford to buy the basic necessities for food. So that's very alarming. Okay. We are not living in a perfect world where we think we work day and night, and then at the end of the month we get monthly salary. Okay, we think that's for us, but in reality it's not, because the money will be used to cater for our children, for our elderly, and for our parents. So with that also could lead to the work conflict, work-family conflict as well. Because, okay, let's talk about this dual responsibility. Like previous 5 years, decades ago, usually man is the only breadwinner. All right, wife stays at home, taking care for children, taking care of the household, and is sufficient enough to provide enough food on the table. While education is not secondary of importance as compared to today and age, right? But right now, like both husband and wife have to work together to sustain their life, to provide the best for their children and therefore elderly also. So with the demand also, because right now with the economic situation, like women have to return to workforce, right? So they have to cater for children, for the elderly, for the husband, for the household, and to also fulfill the expectation of job responsibility is not that easy. That could lead to burnout, could lead to exhaustion, and what we can do from this, okay? Because at the same time, we want women to return to workforce, because we believe on the women's significant contribution to the economy, to the society, but also the challenge faced by the women especially is very hard to say. And then I think also this is important as well to look from the religious belief, okay? We as a Muslim, Okay, we want to practice being a good Muslim, where we have this religious value, where we have to serve, we have to be obeyed to our parents, right? Even in Quran, also hadith stated many times ayat that you have to serve your parents in a good manner. Like even there is one riwayat Al-Bukhari stated that this one individual asked to Rasulullah SAW asking, what is the most afdal thing to do as a good Muslim? So Rasulullah said, pray in time. Okay, pray when the time comes in. Okay, what's the next afdal thing to do is to serve your parent, to be devoted to your parents. So it shows that there is a high value also in religion that makes us become the family first culture, that we want to take care of our elderly regardless of how it is, how hard challenge it is. We want to do it because we as a good daughter, as a good son to our parents. So I think that's certain challenge being trapped within the sandwich generation.
Yeah, still on the topic of, you know, perhaps women in the workforce, right? Kind of along the same lines of supporting young families. Malaysia has shown progress when it comes to introducing family-friendly policies, like increasing the maternal leave to 98 days from the previous 60 days. But Min Hui, what more can the government do to support working families, you think?
Right, so there are a couple of strategies that I think the government can put in place, especially in terms of legislative frameworks and labour protections. The first is really shared parental leave. Now what we have is maternity and paternity leave, but these are taken at the point of childbirth. But we know that care needs extend well beyond that, well into adolescence. So our policies really need to employ what I call is a life cycle approach, understanding that care needs actually last throughout the lifetime and people need support on that front. So shared parental leave is a form of leave that's different from paternity and maternity leave, but it's the kind of leave that parents can take if they need to care for their children. And when I say shared, it means that it is shared between mothers and fathers, because it is shown, you know, in research that when it is not shared, or they don't say it's shared, mothers tend to take most of that leave. And what happens when she's away from the job for an extended period of time? She starts to accrue penalties to her career, things like that. So what some countries have done is try to put in specific quotas for fathers so that they are able to take that leave, or they are encouraged and facilitated to take that kind of leave, so we can ensure that that care burden could be redistributed within the household. Well, that's just the first way. The next is on paternity leave, right? We know that paternity leave is about 7 days compared to women for 98 days. I mean, there's a reason why maternity leave is so long. It is because women need that time to rest and recuperate after childbirth. It's good for maternal and child health outcomes. But for fathers, really 7 days might be too short. But you know, there is no magic number for paternity leave. You know, in some countries it's about 10 days, other countries about 14 days. But one of the things that research shows is that countries that have put in this leave, at times, fathers don't want to take that leave, or they feel worried to take that leave because they're worried about the kinds of career repercussions they might accumulate. And so it is really important that if we are going to increase paternity leave, we're going to put shared parental leave in place, this must be met by changes in gender norms and our workplace culture norms, because we could have the best legislative frameworks, the best policies in place, but if the culture is not conducive to taking that, to allowing parents to be able to fulfill their caregiving responsibilities in the home, that is going to be a big problem. Now, one more thing that Malaysia is already doing, but could potentially be relooked at, is on flexible working arrangements. So we're doing really well on this front. I think in the amendments to the Employment Act 1995, recently, what happened was that they put in provisions for flexible work arrangements, allowing employees to apply for this from their employers. And in the recent budget, there was also action towards giving some kind of tax deduction to companies who implement flexible work arrangements. Now that's a good thing, but how does this work in practice is something that we need to see. Are companies coming on board? Do they see the value of this, or are they behind the scenes discouraging employees from doing that? That is a form of discrimination in itself. So we need to look at how these policies, you know, the ones that we put in place, we need to do some monitoring and evaluation to see how effective it has been, especially for working parents.
Yeah, I agree. Now, Fiza, would you like to add to what Min Hui had just said, you know, especially when it comes to the policies beginning either from the government level or and what about the private sector or companies? Are they following? Are they able to follow this? What do you think?
First of all, I would like to add up from the Miss in regards to that. I think, of course, private sector could play their role also with what government trying to implement. Like for example, just now the point stated that tax relief is true based on the budget 2025, where the government provided additional 50% tax deduction for employer if they employ women return to workforce, and also additional 50% tax deduction for employer if they paid up 12 months for employee to care for their children or ill or disabled person. So I think this is one of the assistance government provide to the private sector as well. And also, besides that, I believe private sector could play its role in terms of creating a safe and flexible working environment. For example, like improve the maternity leave. Like for example, from there are still company I think implement 2 months, which is small size company, but perhaps you can improve your maternity leave periods, and then for fathers as well, and then for the leave care as well, to take care of the elderly and to take care of the person with disabilities. And also, again, I think it's very important, and I think it's very privileged for companies that could provide childcare institution within their organization. So I think perhaps government could mandate private sector that you can play your role, you provide childcare support and other related support system as part of your corporate responsibility. Okay, and then you make the childcare support as part of your business infrastructure. I think that will boost morality and also encourage more women to return to workforce, and at the same time boost the economic productivity. I think that will definitely help government and private sector so that we can ensure we can create a safe space for all, for women, and we take a holistic and sustainable approach for all, including the women who have children as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I second the point on perhaps encouraging the private sector or companies to have, childcare at the offices or making it more accessible. Min Hui, how do you think the government can now address the rising cost of childcare and education to make it more affordable for families?
Well, there are a couple of ways you can go about doing this, but I'll first respond as well to what Fiza has just said. The idea is that a lot of parents want workplace childcare centres. It's the most convenient. But the issue is that Malaysia, our businesses are 97% SMEs, and they are unable to afford that kind of investment in infrastructure. They don't even have the space or the resources for it, right? So ideally, moving forward, we need to understand what are the barriers for SMEs and how can we support them. One of the things that I've written about in my research is also about how community-based workplace childcare centres are really important. So what that looks like is potentially a few SMEs within a certain area. They're in a certain area can pool funds and resources towards creating a childcare centre within the vicinity that all employees within that area could use. Of course, this is dependent on many things like urban planning issues, the space that you have, the kind of resources you have. But this could be an option to support our SMEs, because the majority of workplace childcare centres in Malaysia currently are for public sector or MNC. So this is not going to SMEs, right? So we need to think of more nuanced ways we can support them. Mandating them could be an option, but it is not realistic for the SMEs that we have in Malaysia. We should be supporting them and providing them the know-how on how to build this. So creating that framework is really important. But that's one way to make childcare more accessible, workplace childcare centres. The next is how you asked how to make it more affordable. Well, I'm always of the belief that public childcare centres are the way to go. The good thing is Malaysia has quite an extensive network of public childcare services, but the issue that has come with it is that it's quite fragmented. So there are several ministries running these childcare centres, and so there is a need to streamline them and to see, what is the coverage. The good thing is that these services are also located within locales or communities that are quite vulnerable or low income. But moving forward, how can we scale that up? How can a wider subset of people join this? It's not just people who are low income. Could it be, other people who are on the edge of being low income to middle income? Could they also benefit from such services if we want to ensure coverage of early childcare and education services, right? So that's the first thing. But the second thing we also need to do is to think about how our childcare services, are they running the full workday, right? Because a lot of childcare services, kindergartens for example, they're not childcare services, but they're considered childcare education services, ECCE. Sometimes they run till like 11, 12. And what happens when a parent who is working a full day, they have to sort of figure out transport. How am I going to get my child back home? Should I leave my job to get this? So a lot of what happens is that women tend to, drop out of the labor force, or they reduce their work hours or transition to part-time to be able to do that kind of in-between work. But the problem is then that, the costs accumulate, because then they will have less salary, less savings across their lifetime. They will have, impacts on their career progression. And then, the worst case is when they arrive at old age with very little social protection or savings, and then we have a cycle of issues. We come back to the sandwich generation again, because then that person is also dependent on their children. So we have to think more holistically about this, and also think about what kind of public options are important here.
Yeah. So I did catch your point on when you were talking about, like more on supporting the sandwich generation, and also about the women's roles, especially when they have to kind of take up, childcare, and also elderly care. Perhaps, what do you think are the roles of the employers, perhaps, in helping these parents by offering more flexible work arrangements, perhaps? Hafizah?
Again, as my point before, I think employer must play a role in helping providing safe and flexible working environment for women to return to workforce. Like for instance, perhaps government and also private sector could have some sort of collaboration or discussion on how to mitigate this matter. Like again, like Min mentioned earlier, there is a change or amendment to the Employment Act, whereby it allows for flexible work arrangements. So basically, it essentially can be done. It can be done because due to, I think, because of the pandemic COVID-19. So does it mean that we have to take extraordinary situation just to align extraordinary measures? So I think you do not have to wait for that kind of situation for you to come up with something better. Like how Min said just now, is again to improve the flexibility working environment. Okay, perhaps you can work from home or you can work from anywhere, as long as your productivity and your result of your job is not affected. And then also, trying to create working environment that is safe, and perhaps you can bring your child to your office. I think that would be better as well, because in certain case whereby they have children and their children are sick, you cannot send to childcare center, because otherwise other children will be affected. So what about this? Does that mean that women have to take day leave just to take care of their children? So I think if you provide flexibility in terms of your working space is very conducive, and then children can come and stay there with their mom, I think that's good. All right, and then the other thing is again subsidy. I think, for example, there are actually certain big size of companies provide subsidy for childcare allowance for their employees. So I think that one can be considered also for other companies as well. Perhaps I think Gamuda gave around almost 200 for childcare allowance. So I think that's good. That's good. Perhaps other company also can follow the role played by Gamuda and other companies as well. And beside that, again, I think, for instance, also, this is interesting also, you can give like ampao or coupon of every birth rate, right? So like it's like you encourage them to have more children, so that you can contribute back to the economy, to the society as well. And then like insurance company, like from cater for 1 to 3 children, perhaps to 5 children, so that would be better. So if you want to talk about economic growth, and also social cohesion for the well-being for all. Why don't we be inclusive? We include all, we include the women, children into our economy. I would say the care economy. Then I think we can be ensure that no one is left behind and we can cater for all. Yeah.
Ideally, right? But of course, when we talk about perhaps the cost of perhaps parental leave and also all of these like subsidies, who bears the cost? Would you like to take this?
Right. So let's look first at, I think, maternity and paternity leave, because there's been a lot of discussion around that. So I'll bring up a story in the news that came out, I think, early last year when the Employment Act came into effect. There was a survey that was done, and it showed that employers were actually preferring not to hire women, because even if they were not pregnant, because they were concerned that they would have to go on maternity leave and everything. The issue boils down to the fact that in Malaysia, also a lot of countries, the cost of maternity and paternity leave is fully borne by employers. And a lot of employers will say like, oh, we don't have the resources, it's really difficult. That may or may not be the case. But moving forward, how can we make that more sustainable? Because we don't want the flip side to be discrimination against hiring women, even women who are not even having children yet, right? Or even women who are going to have children, right? So some of the funding models that have been raised in policy research is something called the tripartite funding model, where the cost of maternity and paternity leave is shared across the employee, the employer, and the government. In that way, it is great because we get to show that the cost of care is really a collective responsibility across society. So that is one of the ways we can ensure sustainability moving forward, and that we can sort of try to mitigate the kinds of discrimination against women. This is just one way. But in terms of things like child subsidies, childcare support, well, I'm of the belief that it should be publicly funded, but then, Malaysia might not have that kind of fiscal space. So we've been talking, I'm not an expert on that, but we've been talking a lot about rationalizing our subsidies and things like that. Moving forward, we do need to increase our fiscal space to be able to fund public services, because what happens is when it's out of pocket, people are going to drop out of work. It's the same for elderly care services. What happens is they're not able to afford care, so then they don't, right? They stay at home, they rely on someone, and that person has to leave their job. Or elderly care is quite difficult, right? So what happens then? The cost is borne by individuals and families, and we see that in terms of our negative effects in terms of our productivity, our labor force participation, our economic growth. All of these have knock-on impacts on our economy as a whole. So it is very important we invest, because the return of investment will happen later on, especially when we are an aging population. You need to invest in the young and the working age currently and support them, so that when they're in old age, we'll be in a much better space.
Yeah, talking about the aging population, because it is expected Malaysia will become an aging country by 2030, and by 2044 will become an aged country, where the 15% of the total population will become 60 years old and above. And also talking about the fertility rate in Malaysia as well, because if we compare to 50 years back, the fertility rate of Malaysians have dropped significantly. Like during the 1950s, the birth rate for every woman is around 6 to 7 children, and then move on to the around 20s, children is about 3 children per woman, and the latest recorded data last year is around 1.6 children per woman aged from 15 to 49 years old. So, and that's the lowest recorded history in the country. And in fact, if you want to compare fertility rate, Malaysia is the third lowest as compared to neighbouring countries after Singapore and Thailand. So what I want to share is that the raising of longevity, or the increased life expectancy of the baby boomers, and also the reduced fertility among the young couple, married couple, I think it will definitely lead to the increase of elderly needing care, and also at the same time reduce the numbers of caregivers to support them. I think right now is Malaysia really need to invest in economy, like what we mentioned, is the care economy, because Yes, there is one report released by the UNDP on the investing care economy in Malaysia, where it stated that if we really invest in this economy, it will add up to around RM52 billion into the Malaysian economy by 2030. And then what it results is there are more than 3 million will return to workforce, and then it will improve the economic productivity. So I think we need to tackle this issue of aging population and fertility. Otherwise, because we know the sandwich generation is the one that pays tax, purchase good, and as compared to this elderly, right? So that's why we need to focus on this to ensure that our economic productivity still can be boosted, but also we also must ensure that social protection is still our top consideration as well. So I think right now Malaysia need to invest in care economy, and we must ensure that actually invest in social infrastructure, it will have a multiplier effect, not just into job creation, but social cohesion and also well-being for all. Yeah.
So with about 2 minutes that we have left, I'd like to just get Min Hui's thoughts about how we can actually prepare for an aging nation to ensure that the elderly population can live comfortably so that they don't have to depend on their children.
Well, there are a couple of ways to go about it. It's a difficult question because that infrastructure is not there yet. The first thing that we need to do is, of course, invest in preventative health measures. We know that Malaysians are living longer, but they're not necessarily living in better health. Research shows that about 9.5 years is actually spent in poor health, and for women it's 10.5 years. So there is a gendered element to all of this. We need to ensure preventative health measures so that people are able to live in good health and are able to age actively and healthily. That's the first thing. But beyond that, we also need to look at things like preparing elderly for retirement, their retirement savings. How aware are they that they have to, have some kind of social protection? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even qualify for social protection in Malaysia. We need to think of more equitable forms of social protection. Some kind of social insurance or long-term care insurance is the ideal way to get there. But unfortunately, we might not be able to get there in this time. So what are some other ways that we can support the elderly? So I always believe that public care systems are important. Looking at the research, actually, a lot of elderly prefer to age in place, meaning in their own homes and things like that. So community-based care services, where services come to them, to the communities where they live in, are the more affordable and accessible ways we can provide care to elderly so that they're also able to age healthily. So these are just some of the strategies I think Malaysia should look forward to.
Mm-hmm. But we definitely have to raise more awareness on the preparation for an aging nation, because that's what Fiza mentioned just now. We are predicted to becoming an aging nation by 2030. Now, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you, ladies, for joining us on the conversation. I was speaking with Min Hui, gender consultant from UNFPA, as well as Nur Hafizah Noslan, PJ Lestari advocate. I'm Soraya Mia, and we'll see you next time.